Alright, to wrap up this section, I want us to discuss some important concepts regarding data modeling, and more specifically, why we imported all the different tables into our data model. At this point, we've reviewed the project requirements and imported all the necessary data to complete our report. However, some of you may be asking why we imported all these different tables, especially considering, in theory, that we could have imported a single table. Now, there's a very good reason why we didn't do this. Importing a single table with all of our information, including our numbers, dates, and texts, would have made this file size huge. More specifically, a data model with only one table means we'll have duplicated information and redundant data. We definitely want to avoid duplicated information as much as possible. The easiest way to do that is to make sure that our data is split between two primary categories: data we do math against, which is usually numbers, and information we want to display or see, which is usually text. So, let's talk through an example of why we want to avoid this single table design and instead use a multi-table design in our data models. Here we have an example of a single sales table that contains all the information about product sales. Take a careful look at the rows and see if you can identify where there exists duplicate values. Specifically, all the product information exists on more than one row. Using Road Bike 150 as an example, that alone has the same values repeated on 4 different rows. Now, we definitely need to keep the product level detail on this table, but what we don't want on this table is the text or lookup information. All we actually need is the product ID column, which will let us look up the product information on another table. The easiest way to think about it? If you ever have text information you want in a data model, such as product, location, or company info, all you want on your data table is a single column key that lets you look up the text information on another table that has the duplicate information removed. Here's a great example of that same table, but now with the data split into the data you want to do math against and the data you'd want to display. More importantly, notice that on the lookup table, the duplicate values have been eliminated. Once we hop back into our Power BI file, we'll learn how to create relationships to link these tables together so they can utilize each other's data. The best part of these relationships too is that you'll be able to use any column from the lookup table after you connect the two keys together. Now, let's briefly run through some common characteristics of data tables and lookup tables to help you identify them in the future. To be fair, there are exceptions to each of these descriptors, but in general, they apply in most cases. As we run through these characteristics, let's consider using our sales and products table from the previous slides as examples for our data and lookup table. Data tables are typically tall, meaning they have many rows. This is often because they're collecting transactions, records, or events. On the other side, our lookup table is usually a distinct list of items, so it won't have that many rows. It will, however, have many columns of various descriptions or attributes for each item, so these tables are often wide. Data tables often consist of primarily dates and numbers, usually a combination of the date of occurrence, the values for that record, then any corresponding keys relating to hierarchies or categories you'd want to get from the lookup tables. As the name and description implies, lookup tables consist primarily of text values. Now, if I describe in a few words or less the primary function of these two table types, they'd be as follows. The goal of a data table is to contain data to do math against. Simple as that. Whereas lookup tables, as the name implies, are designed to contain information to look up. Containers for records or transactions, they're typically very fast changing, meaning updated often. Very likely they're updated daily or sometimes weekly. Lookup tables comparatively are updated less often, so information regarding products, customers, geography, and so on don't change nearly as often as records, transactions, or sales. Last but not least, data tables almost always contain some element of time, whether or not it's date and time or just date. Whatever transaction is being recorded on this table usually comes with some sort of record when it occurred. Similarly, since lookup tables don't record transactions, they normally don't contain any date or timestamp. Alright, that should give you a healthy crash course in the reasons why we want multiple tables in our data model, and a good list of characteristics that data and lookup tables typically have. We've now finally come to the end of Section 1, gather and report requirements and importing our data. In the next section, we'll get to dive into some data transformations and start utilizing our data model to create some impactful visualizations in Power BI Desktop.